Welcome back to Random Vlogs. Thank you everyone for sticking with my channel to watch all the videos. Today we will learn to make 51 different fun things at home. Enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment with what you would like to see next below.
Diving on into our first project, we are going to be making this flower stamped pillow, which I created back in 2018, but it's still such an incredible DIY project. I went ahead and I started off by taking some baby breath flowers and just pressing them between two pieces of paper and added a couple of books on top. And after a few hours, you're going to have these nice pressed flowers, and we're going to essentially be using these as stamps for our DIY. So next what I did was use a little bit of black fabric paint, and I stippled it on with a stippling brush, used a little spray bottle to spritz some water on there to almost turn it into a watercolor. And then I stamped it on the edge of my pillow as shown here, using a paper towel on top just to absorb any of that extra water. So as you can see, as you stamp it down, it creates this nice kind of watercolor stamped effect, and I created this all the way around the entire exterior of the pillow, making sure to kind of create a circular shape as I went with it, because in the end I wanted to go back with a paintbrush and some watered down paints to add an initial. This is actually based off of a pillow I saw on Anthropology that had an initial on it, and I thought it was super cute, so I wanted to create my own, and that's how this one turned out. I'm a huge fan of taking Polaroid photos, but I never really know how to display them, so I figured we can create this really fun interchangeable Polaroid display. So I went ahead and used this wood sign and a couple of these bags here to create this. So the wood sign is from Michael's Craft Store. I went ahead and painted it white to start, but you could stain this, you could paint it black, however you want to go along with it. And then at the top, I went ahead and screwed in one of these little hooks here, which are traditionally used for picture hanging or hanging plants from your ceiling. And then I went ahead and grabbed my 3x4 inch bags, punched a hole in the top there, and you can slide your Polaroids inside, which really allows you to interchange them and kind of display them as you would like to. You can also add a ton of bags to this. You can have like 10 to 15 bags hanging from the hook that have lots of different Polaroids on them, so you can kind of flip through them and see all of your memories in one location. Next up, we have a fun dollar store project. This is wicker lantern lights, and all I did for this project was get some of these little wicker balls from the dollar store, and I went ahead and I spray painted them first with a brass spray paint. Now you could spray paint this however you'd like to, but I thought the brass would be nice because it kind of would make them look like metallized objects on top of your light strand in the end. So I went ahead and sprayed these with a brass spray paint, and once I was finished with that, I went ahead and grabbed my fairy light strand. Now the best way to put this through these wicker balls is honestly to look for larger holes in the wicker. That way you can kind of string it through like a needle and thread. So I went ahead and I strung through my light strand, and I made sure that a light was positioned right in the center of each wicker ball. And once the light was in position, I went ahead and added a little bit of hot glue onto either side to hold it into place, and that finishes off your little fairy light strand. Here is a wall art project that is again totally customizable and extremely simple. So if you need something quick and easy, this one is for you. I started off with a couple of metal rings. Now you just want two varying sizes for this project, and I gave them a nice coat of black spray paint. But again, this is totally customizable, so you can spray it whatever color or metal finish you want to. Now I went ahead and I did a little lark's head knot of the gray yarn at the top there and just tied a little loop. This is going to be the top of our wall hanging where we are going to be hanging it on the nail. And the next step is going to be very, very simple. Just cutting a couple pieces of your yarn to about a yard in length, folding it in half, and just looping it on the larger of the two rings. This is a very, very repetitive process of just looping the yarn onto each of the rings, letting it kind of cascade and waterfall over the top of each other to create a little layered wall hanging. So once you reach the end, I just created a blunt cut with those pieces. I feel like it gives it a little bit of a cleaner look, and on the ring that is smaller, I'm going to be applying this gray yarn to it. So doing the same exact methodology, just cutting it at the bottom to create a nice blunt cut, looping them on, layering it up, and that finishes off this wall hanging. I remember this copper and concrete jewelry stand being a huge hit on my channel, so I'm really excited to kind of be reliving it right now. So you're going to want to go ahead and get a couple of copper pipe pieces along with some concrete and a mold that you're going to be using for your concrete. So I just used some simple concrete mix. You guys all know that I basically suggest the pre-sifted one that comes in the 10-pound bucket. Back then though, when I was creating this project, I did not know about that. So now I do. I highly suggest that one. I went ahead and mixed up some concrete, poured it in the bottom of an oatmeal container, and then went ahead and placed one of my probably about 8-inch tall copper pipes on the inside there. You're gonna wanna go ahead and let that dry fully overnight so you have a nice base for your jewelry stand. The great thing about concrete is it's pretty heavy, so it's going to weight it down and allow you to apply really whatever you want to the stand. So I'm going to go ahead and just use E6000 to kind of conjoin the copper pipes together, but I went ahead and kind of placed this little T-shaped joint right there, and then I also added some E6000 on the inside to place in one of my copper pipes as well, which is going to be the crossbar. Just let this cure for a couple of hours to the next day, and that finishes off your jewelry stand. Bringing back another dollar store DIY for you guys. This was from a dorm video that I did, and the total cost of this project was $3.50. I used this cutting board on the left side, which I got at the 99-cent store, some nails, some string, and a pencil. So the first thing I did was actually just kind of trace out or sketch out a crescent moon shape, and then I went ahead and just dotted wherever I wanted the nails to be. I also added a couple of nail holes on the bottom, as you can see there, just to go ahead and allow myself to hang a couple pieces of jewelry off this or whatever I wanted to add to it. Now, I used really tiny 1/2-inch nails, which required me to go ahead and use a plier to hold it into place and then a hammer to securely press it into the wood there. And once you go ahead and hammer in all of your nails, I just went back with this black cotton cording, which I just kind of very no rhyme or reason applied it around the entire moon shape just to fill it in. I also went around the edge to give it kind of a nice clean finish, as you can see here, looping it around every single nail. This is just going to kind of finish it off and give the piece an outline. I just like the way that this looks a little bit more than when it is unfinished, and that really finishes off your jewelry hanger. Moving on to our next project, I called this one Floral Globe Decor. Not sure why, because it is more so a fun paperweight or just a cute little shelf decor piece, but I went ahead and I used some resin for this project, a mold, and also some faux florals. So the first thing that I did was I actually sprayed my resin release spray into my mold, and then I pulled off a couple of these yellow roses here. I think I got these at Michael's or Joann's, but you can also get them from the dollar store for sure. So I pulled off a couple of those along with the leaves, and then you're gonna want to mix up your resin. So the resin is super simple. It is equal parts of the resin and equal parts of the hardener. Just make sure to stir each one individually for about 2 minutes each, and then mix them together and stir for about 2 minutes as well. So as you can see here, I'm just mixing it up, making sure it's nice and incorporated, and then you're gonna go ahead and mix them together. So just pour one of the cups into the other one. The resin is now going to start its process of chemical reaction, I guess you could say, and you're going to pour that into your mold there. I then placed in my flowers. You could do flowers, you could do glitter, whatever you have that is small that would kind of fit inside of this resin mold would be perfect for this project. I just opted for the flowers there. I whipped up another batch of resin, poured it over the top to ensure that everything was fully covered, and then you're gonna let this sit for probably about 24 to 48 hours, and that finishes off your little paperweight. I remember this piece of decor like it was yesterday. This I had in my room for so many years and I loved it so much. It's a little hello framed decor piece, and all I used for this project was some yarn, a little frame, some fabric glue, and some canvas. So I first started off by taking my frame here and I glued it down to my duck canvas. Now this frame was, I believe, from Michael's at the time in their little like finished home decor section, but I got it on sale. I thought it was really cute, so I filled it with the canvas, tacked it down with a little bit of fabric glue, or you can use hot glue, and just cut away all that excess once you feel like it is nice and adhered on there. And next what we're going to go ahead and do is use a pencil to kind of map out the word that we're going to do. I just wanted to do the word hello because I have an obsession with writing that word. I don't know why, I just absolutely love writing out the word hello. So I opted for this mustard yellow yarn because yellow is one of my favorite colors, and I used a little bit of hot glue to adhere down the yarn in the loopy cursive font that I chose, which was my own handwriting. I don't know where I was going with that, but I went ahead and I glued it down in this nice little cursive font, and I just love the way it turned out. It just made me happy every single day I looked at this piece, and you can again totally customize this to have whatever word you want on the inside. It turned out really cute. Back to the dollar store projects, this was what I called a memory mobile, and I created this for $2.50. Now, that silver thing looks a little odd, and that is because it is a Let's Party grilling wok. I don't know why I opted for this, but I found it, and I was like, let's go ahead and create something with this item here. So I went ahead and I cut off 2 sides of the grilling wok, and then we're going to be moving on to our wooden clothespins. So these are some small wooden clothespins that I'm going to be using some black cording to tie a double knot right through the center section of the clothespin and cut away any of the excess strands, and then also make sure to leave probably about 12 to 20 inches of leftover string. That way you have a variance that you can kind of use as you're attaching them to your grilling wok. So here comes the fun part. We're going to be sticking our strands up through the holes that are in the wok there, and I'm going to go ahead and glue them down and then cut off any excess tails. So we basically have a ton of these clothespins that are going to be hanging from that metal section there. I think it probably would have been a little bit cuter if I was to maybe spray paint this black or spray paint it brass, but I went ahead and I tied a strand at the top there, which is going to be our hanger. You can clip all of your memories or mementos here, and it just creates a fun little mobile. Here we have a super affordable take on a mixed metal wall hanging. So this is a moon phase wall garland, and what I used for this was some chipboard, some spray paint, some chain, some wire cutters, and that was pretty much all for the project. So I started off by spraying my chipboard or my thick kind of heavyweight cardstock with some copper spray paint, and then I went ahead and I cut apart a lot of these pieces of silver chain. Now if you want to, you can go ahead and use copper chain as well, but I wanted to go in with silver chain and kind of have that mixed metal look. I really love that when it comes to minimalistic wall art. I think it adds a lot of detail and interest. So I went ahead and I cut those apart, and I actually just hot glued those on to the chain, which I would never do nowadays. I would definitely use a jump ring if I was to recreate this project, but I think back then I didn't have jump rings, and honestly, this was going to be a super lightweight project in the end, so I knew the hot glue was going to hold for sure. And I think the varying lengths of silver chain across this piece kind of give a lot of detail. If you had everything at the same level, it honestly in the end would kind of just look a little bit boring. So I love mixing up the lengths of chain for those vertical sections to make sure that the moons are kind of hanging at different levels once you actually hang it up on the wall. And this is what the chain base is going to look like, and the next step is going to be cutting out some moon shapes. So you can totally print out some shapes if you'd like to, or you could freehand them like I did. I just kind of penciled them onto a piece of paper, cut them out. I love the organic look of it, and I just glued them on with some hot glue, and that finished off your wall hanging. I personally love a good hanging planter, and I also love concrete, so this project is basically the best of both worlds for me. So I started off by mixing up my concrete mix with a little bit of water here. You're going to want this to kind of basically be the consistency of like a pancake batter. As you can see here, this one is a little bit thicker, but that totally works as well. And the mold that I'm going to be using is actually just a simple little, I guess, clear solo cup. And then in the middle there, I'm applying a Dixie cup and I'm pressing it down on the inside. Next, what I'm doing is grabbing some hemp cording or whatever string you want the hanging planter to be hanging from, and you're going to tie knots onto the ends of them. The knots are basically going to be like extra support, so once we press this down into the concrete, the knot is kind of going to be covered in cement and allow it to not be pulled out. If it's just a string, you could imagine kind of being able to pull the string right out, but that knot is just like an extra reinforcement. So you're going to want to go ahead and let that dry overnight or until it is nice and cured, and then pull off your plastic cup in the end and remove the Dixie cup on the inside. Now you can go ahead with a sand file or whatever you have, some sandpaper, a nail file. I mix those words together to make sand file to sand away any excess concrete. Tie your strings into a loop at the top, and that finishes off your concrete planter. I'm sure we've all seen these mesh trash bins at the dollar store, at Walmart, at Target, wherever it might be, but they're always not the cutest. So I want to share with you guys how you can add just a little bit of faux leather to this piece to make it more rustic and overall just cuter in the end. So the first thing that I did was I went ahead and I marked 3-inch wide sections and then drew a line to create a 3-inch wide strip that I could then cut with my scissors, because we are going to then go ahead and fold over those raw edges into the middle. So we're going to be ending up with a 1.5-inch wide strip of this leather material. material. So you're going to want to do this that way you have nice clean edges on the front there, and then on the front side of your wastebasket, using a generous amount of hot glue, you're going to be applying your faux leather material and then creating kind of a little loopy handle at the top, which again is just for visual interest. There's no like rhyme or reason to this piece. And then I cut off the excess at the bottom there and went in with a little bit of white embroidery floss. I probably should have done this with like some jute cording or something just to match the vibe a little bit better, but I think it turned out cute nonetheless. So I went in and I just added a little X shape to secure the leather in place a little bit more, but also add a bit of detail to that edge there. I think this adds a nice touch. Tie it off on the back side, repeat on the opposite side, and that finishes off this basket. Creating a concrete coaster set is actually extremely affordable and not as hard as it looks. All you're going to need is a couple of solo cups, some concrete mix, some water, and a hot glue gun. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is actually cutting the top rims off of our solo cups and creating our very own mold. And I'm going to be gluing down the top of our solo cups to the notebook cover there. So we're basically creating our very own mold. So next what I wanted to do was mix up the concrete and pour it into the mold that we created. So you're just going to tap that in, making sure that you added enough hot glue around the perimeter of your mold to where the concrete will not seep out at all. Let that cure overnight, and once it is fully cured, you could basically demold your new set of coasters by pulling off that notebook cover, and this is what they end up looking like. You could sand the edges with a nail file or a little bit of sandpaper to give them a nice finish, and that's the finished project. Next up, we're going to be making this DIY macrame, really cute kind of like lantern candle holder. So I'm going to be using a mason jar along with some hemp cording. And the first thing that I'm going to be doing is measuring out about 2-yard sections of my hemp cording. And you're going to need, I believe, 6 pieces in the end, 6 or 8. So what I'm going to be doing is starting out by gluing down my pieces in the center here. So I actually did end up using 8 strands. And you're going to want to glue them so that you have all evenly placed out 8 sections on the bottom of your mason jar. And then I added a little bit of hot glue to hold them into place as I started the macrame process. But this is just, again, a very repetitive process like a couple of the earlier projects. We are creating a collection of square knots where we grab the neighboring strand and we connect it to a knot that was neighboring it as well. And you're just going to be repeating this process until you reach the top rim of the jar. So I just kind of work in a circle and create a knot, as you can see here, twist it, move on to our next side, create a knot, twist it, move on to our next side, create a knot. And as you keep creating these knots, it's going to get tighter and tighter up towards the top, which is what you're going to want so that it kind of forms around your mason jar shape. So as you can see here, getting closer to the top here, it really creates a nice nautical vibe. It almost gives like a fishnet look to the piece, and this is what it ended up looking like in the end. You can tie off your strands, you can turn it into a hanging planter if you want to and leave them long, or glue them as I did and just pop a candle inside as a candle holder. Cork is another really fun material to work with, and it's also super affordable. I got these cork sheets at the dollar store and I wanted to turn them into some geometric wall decals, which you can just use as wall decals if you'd like to, but you can also actually pin things into them and use them as kind of like a little pegboard. So the first thing that I did was I just created triangle shapes out of the square shape, and I highly suggest using an X-Acto knife for cutting cork. It is so simple and easy. All you have to do is just kind of create a couple of strokes across using a ruler, and the cork will cut nice and smoothly. So I went ahead and I created these. I also went ahead and created some smaller ones as well, just using 1/4 of the cube. And in the end, I had all these different triangle shapes, which I could then go in and add a little bit of painted detail to. So using a little bit of Scotch tape, I just applied that on the edge there. And this one in particular, I wanted to have a nice little white edge. So I went ahead and I added some white acrylic paint on there. I also painted some fully white as well. And once you're done, you can pull off your acrylic paint and you can just attach these to the wall using some 3M mounting squares, and that finishes off this project. Another super affordable wall decor piece is a pressed flower wall art, and you can make this on a canvas, you could put it inside of a shadow box frame, whatever you want to do, but all you're really going to need is a couple of florals and leaves that you could find out in the garden or on a walk down the street. So as you can see here, I just picked up a random variety of different flowers and leaves, and we're going to be using a bit of parchment paper to press these in between some heavy objects. So the first thing that I did was actually rip off a piece of parchment paper, place another piece on top, and on top of that I placed a ton of my books from school or when I was going to school on top of that. And you're gonna wanna let this dry for about 2 to 3 full days, or until all the water has been drawn out of the pieces and they are completely dry and flattened, ready for the next step of the process. So as you can see here, I have all these flattened leaves and flowers. And lastly, the next step in the process is just to glue these down to a canvas or some form of frame. So I ended up lining them up. I just thought it added a nice minimal approach to this piece, but you can scatter them around, create patterns, however you want to do it. But in the end, you come up with this really cute dried floral wall decor piece. Whenever I create these IKEA rugs here on the channel, you guys always love them so much, and this is going to be one of the designs that I've done. I believe I've done about 3 to 4 of them, but I'm using the Lohals rug, which is basically a jute knotted rug from IKEA, and I'm also going to be using some masking tape to mask off any sections that I want to apply the spray paint to. So as you can see here, I applied 2 borders that ran horizontally, and then I applied a ton of vertical strips, and each one of these vertical strips took up about 2 different knots. So I kind of used my knots as measurement, and my masking tape that I used, which I believe was about 1 inch wide, ended up covering 2 full knots, so I was able to kind of measure out as I went, and then I went ahead and applied on my paint here. So I'm just using a regular white acrylic paint. Now, since I've actually created a couple of these rugs since this project was created, I highly suggest using spray paint as opposed to just acrylic paint. Honestly, it is so much easier. You can just spray right over the top of your masked area, wait for it to dry, peel it off. I also feel like the paint goes on so much more opaque as well, and if you do this process, you could apply a clear coat on top to lock it in. Next up, we are creating a set of felt coasters, which are really cute, and I actually upcycled this Putta box from IKEA. I had this in my stash for a while, and I just never ended up using it for any form of storage. So I was like, why don't I go ahead and actually recycle it and turn it into some coasters and just use the fabric, because I didn't find a use for the actual box itself. So all I had to do for this process was honestly use a ramekin. I traced around the outside of the ramekin to create my coaster size, but you can use whatever you have kind of as a marking utensil. And then I went back in with a pair of scissors and just trimmed around all of the excess, and that honestly, you guys, finishes off this project. It was super simple and easy. I just felt like the material on this was super thick and very durable, so I thought it'd be great for a set of coasters. I also intentionally drew right over the top of the stitching line because I love the detail I added, and I just locked in those seams with a little bit of glue on the edge, and that finished off this coaster set. This project here, you guys, really takes me back because this was such an old DIY that I created, but honestly, it's still such a cute concept, and you can totally use this on really anything that is glass and kind of create a frosted glass look. So the first thing that I actually did was just grab some regular old printer paper, and I'm going to be cutting out some triangle shapes, which are going to be our masks. So I cut a 2-inch wide strip of paper, and from that paper, I went ahead and freehand cut a couple of triangles. I just like the organic shape of a freehand cut triangle as opposed to measuring them all out. I think it kind of adds a little bit more of a boho element to this piece, and I went ahead and I actually adhered these down with just some water-based glue, just an Elmer's glue stick, because it's super easy to remove from glass. It's kind of just a temporary fixation at the moment. And then what I went ahead and did was actually spray on top of it a coat of sea glass spray paint, and as you can see, when you go ahead and remove those masked triangle sections, it reveals the shiny clean glass underneath, and you have a frosted glass over top, which overall gives you this kind of nice embossed etched look. I always actually get requested for a ton of decor that includes like an initial or something that you can customize a little bit, and I love this take on an initial decor piece. I think this would be so cute in an office space. So I actually picked up one of these oversized paper mache letters, which I believe I got it at Michael's, and I also got these kind of balsa wood stick sections, which I'm going to then be tiling on the front of our letter to almost give it a restored wood look, as opposed to making it look paper mache or just painting it or adding to it. I thought the wood really elevated the overall vibe, and it was still a very affordable option. So all you have to do is actually just place the wood on the front side, flip it over to the back side, and use a pen to just kind of mark off the section you want to cut, and use a pair of scissors to simply cut away any excess. And do keep in mind in the end that you can go back in with a little bit of sandpaper if you need to sand away any harsh edges, but once you are done, you kind of get this tiled wood effect that I think looks so stunning in any space. Affordable furniture DIYs are always a hit here on Lone Fox, so I wanted to share with you guys how I created this nightstand from a simple crate from IKEA. So this is the Naglig crate, which you could pick up for about $10 at IKEA, and I went ahead and I started off by just constructing it based off the instructions. You have to just screw all of the elements together, and once they're all screwed up, you have a basic wooden crate. Now, on the bottom of the wooden crate, I wanted to add a leg, so I elevated it off the floor with these little wooden trinket dishes, or like little wooden trays that I found at the craft store as well. They're just a simple wood, very similar to the one from IKEA, and I just E6000 these down. You could also use a nail gun if you'd like to, and once you are done, you have a very simple minimal nightstand. This is a really fun multi-purpose DIY. I created a memento lampshade because lampshades can be a little bit boring, so if you have a basic lamp, especially in like a dorm room or a small space, spice it up with this simple hack here. All that I started off by doing was just painting my clothespins how I wanted them to look, so I think I did a mixture of black and then also just the raw wood as well. All you have to do for this project is literally glue down the clothes clips all the way around the exterior of the lampshade, just kind of spacing them out however you would like them to go, and keep in mind wherever you place a clothespin, you can add a Polaroid or a little memento, and that finishes off this lampshade. It's actually really fun redoing these voiceovers because I forget how many fun projects I could recreate currently that I would love to have in my apartment, such as this wool magazine holder. These are super affordable. All I did was I picked up this gray toned felt from the craft store. Each felt sheet costs under 50 cents, and I cut it in half to start. Then what you're going to want to do is actually fold it into thirds like this. That way you have nice clean edges on the front side and it doesn't have any cut edges. I ended up using some Fabri-Tac adhesive to glue it down on a third of the piece. Then I added a little bit more adhesive on top of that, folded it over once more, and you have a nice tripled up felt piece, which you are going to want to make two of. And then once you have both, you're going to glue them together just about an inch on the bottom. Just glue these two strips together, let them dry. Once it is dry, use a push pin to secure it in the wall and place your magazine inside. If you love a freehand, very artsy project, this one is for you. I created this as a dorm decor piece a while back, and it is just a kind of moon phase galactic pillowcase. I just used a simple white IKEA pillowcase and some black fabric paint to paint on some stars and moons around the exterior of this pillow. I also added a couple of constellations, and that was all. A couple years back, I received a Lalapo candle for Christmas, and it had a really funky kind of hammered metal tin container that it came in, and I wanted to recreate my very own for a fraction of the price. So I found this metal tin here on Amazon, and I literally went to town on it with a hammer, just hammered it all the way around, gave it a very distressed and just unique look. So as you can see, these are going to be our candle canisters. Now these candles here are a couple that I've had in my stash for a while, and I placed them right on top of a pan, just right over the heat. However, I would never do this to this date. I highly suggest getting a boiling pot that you can actually add some water inside of, adding about 2 to 3 inches of water, letting that boil, and then placing your candles inside and letting it slowly melt over time, kind of like a double boiler method. But once it is fully melted, you can go ahead and glue a new wick on the inside of your canister. And then once that is adhered inside, you can go ahead and pour your melted wax very carefully into your canister there. I actually poured both candles in here and mixed up the waxes, but you can totally do one style or create your very own scent with some essential oils, and that finishes off your hammered 10 candle. Another oldie but goodie was this geometric wall hanging. I remember when these geometric shapes were super trendy in interior design, and if it totally matches your style currently, this is a project you should definitely recreate because it is super simple. But a humongous pointer I can give you for creating this project is to work on top of wax paper or parchment paper and just basically lay your sticks down and apply glue on top of them. That way you're not adhering everything together and having to wait for it to dry and it's sticking to your surface. Just work on top of a wax paper or parchment paper and it will easily be able to be removed. I also use the tip of my hot glue gun to kind of melt down any excess hot glue sections. So I created these 3 almost pinwheel style shapes and I attached them together using a little bit of yarn. You're just going to use about 8 inches of yarn between each section to attach them together. Once you reach the end, just tie a little loop at the top that you can hang it off with, and that finishes off your brand new wooden geometric wall decor hanging. This next project was actually another take on that little wall strap that I created with the wool fabric earlier, but this one is just a wall pocket and it is super simple to recreate. You're just going to need 2 pieces of 8.5 by 11 felt, and on one of the pieces you're going to start by rimming the entire outside, leaving a 2.5 inch section at the top that you're not going to be adding glue to, because once you actually adhere this down, the sides and the bottom are going to be nice and adhered, but that 2.5 inch section you're actually going to want to fold down like this, add a little bit of glue to either side as shown, and fold that down. That way it kind of creates this little pocket flap, lay a couple books on top, and once you're done you could hang this on the wall and add whatever you'd like inside. Here's a fun DIY on how to turn your basic pillowcases into these gradient dyed pillowcases. You're just going to need some RIT dye, I use the powder form, a couple of cups, a paintbrush, and your pillowcases. So the first thing that I started off by doing was adding the same amount of water into each cup, and I did use warm water. And next what I did was I actually varied the amount of dye pigment that I applied to each cup. So the first cup I added 1 teaspoon, the second cup I added 2 teaspoons, the third cup I added 3 teaspoons, and so on from there. That way we have an array of pigmentation. And I went ahead and I started off with my darkest color first because it's just easier to start darkest and go lighter. So I applied about a 2-inch strip of our darkest color and worked my way down to the lightest section, probably only applying water at the very end. So as you can see here, this is what the gradient dye is going to look like. Wash out the excess dye and style with a couple of cute throw pillows. Another super affordable set of coasters created here on the channel were these leather wrapped coasters. Now the supplies are very minimal. All you're going to need is some foam board and also some faux leather material. So the first thing that I did was I cut down the scrap piece of foam board into 4-inch by 4-inch squares. Those are going to be our coaster size. Next, once you have those cut out, you're going to go ahead and just cut out a piece of your vinyl leather or your faux leather and cut it out with about 1 inch to spare on all the edges. That way you can go ahead and apply your E6000 adhesive on the bottom side, press it onto your faux leather material, and then you're going to press that down just as shown here. Next, what I did was I cut off all of the corners. That way we can create a nice clean fold, and I also make sure to leave about 1/8 inch of material on that corner. That way when you fold it up, you get a fully covered corner as opposed to having any of the white show through there. So I just went ahead and I adhered down all of our flaps on the back side, let it dry, and cut out a piece of material to glue over the top of those flaps there. And once you are done, this is your finished coaster set. This next project is an IKEA hack where I basically took these wooden cutting boards and I measured 1 inch in on each of the corners and I marked the inch in spot. That way we can know where we're going to be drilling our holes later, because we are going to be turning this into a hanging shelving unit. And this project turned out so cute. I love the way that it turned out in the end. So I just went ahead, brought these pieces outside and used a drill bit that was wide enough for the rope material that we're going to be using here. So as you can see, I got this rope here at the Home Depot. It is a simple nylon rope. And the first thing that I did was I grabbed 2 pieces of my rope and I folded it in half at the very middle point and I tied it in a knot as shown here. Next, what I did was I measured down about 18 inches from our knot and I just made a little marking on our piece because that is exactly where we're going to be tying our knots on each section. Now the knot is what's going to be holding our shelf in place, so you're actually going to want to make sure that all of your knots are in a very similar spot. That way your shelf is very level and it's not off center, because if you have knots that are hanging lower on one side, your shelf is then going to hang lower on one side as well. So using a ruler, measure down about 12 inches, make a marking, and just make sure that you tie your knot in the same spot once again. The great thing about this project is you can totally adjust the knots as needed. They're not anything that is super tight, and once the shelf actually sits on top of the knot, it kind of tightens itself naturally. You can hang this up and enjoy your new hanging shelf. I was a humongous fan of vinyl records back in the day, and I always wanted a method for hanging them on the wall, but I didn't want to have to purchase the actual Urban Outfitters frames that were $20 each, so I was able to create my very own with 1 piece of foam board. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is go ahead and cut out 2 pieces of your foam board that are 2 inches wider or 2 inches bigger than your vinyl record itself. So I have 2 pieces here. I cut out a square on the inside of one of the pieces as well to act as the frame. Now on the sides here, I cut out these 3/8 inch strips, which are going to to act as borders or barriers, and the great thing about using the foam board is that it elevates it a little bit so that you can easily slide your vinyl inside. So I just used some E6000 adhesive and just glued this around the exterior of my vinyl record once it was placed on the inside there, but you do not need to add a piece of this to the top there. That way you can slide your record in and out in case you want to ever exchange it for a different one. So once that was all glued around the outside, I then went ahead and added adhesive to the top of those strips, placed on top my frame section there. So this is kind of creating our shadow box, which you could then slide your vinyl on the inside of. I just wrapped a piece of yarn around the entire exterior inside of the little groove that we created, cut off the excess, tied it in a knot, and I hung this up on the wall, and that was my vinyl frame. This next wall art piece was actually inspired by a piece I saw on Anthropologie's website, but it was $600, so I opted to create my very own piece using this $30 gold frame from Target. I took out the paper on the inside and traced it onto a piece of heavy-duty watercolor paper, and I'm just cutting that out there, and I'm going to start by using this golden paint in the color Carbon Black and mixing it with a little bit of water to create my very own watercolor. Next up, using a very thick watercolor brush, I'm kind of just going to start tracing out a couple of loopy shapes on the right side of this piece of paper and drag it over, following my reference photo to create a couple of other lines as well. This is definitely a super abstract piece of artwork, so there is no rhyme or reason to this piece whatsoever. And I did also go ahead and darken up some of those sections using the paint just right out of the tube, and once I was done with it, I let it dry, popped it back in the frame, and that finished off this wall art piece. I'm back with one of my favorite materials, resin, and we're going to be making one of my favorite projects, some coasters. So these are some agate coaster molds. You can find these on Amazon if you search agate coaster mold. I also got these dried flowers on Amazon as well, but you can totally dry your own based off of some of the methods that I shared with you guys earlier. But the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and mix half and half of our resin together. So you're going to want to use equal parts of resin and equal parts of hardener. I just find it a lot easier to measure them in 2 separate cups. That way you know that you have equal parts, because if you don't, it's not going to cure properly. So once you do have them mixed up, go ahead and stir it for a couple of minutes and add your glitter. Now, the glitter goes such a long way, you guys. I thought what I added was a small amount, but it ended up being quite a bit. So I stirred it throughout my resin, and then I poured a thin base layer into the mold itself. That way I can just go ahead and start placing in my flowers and give them something to grip to. So I placed them right on top, positioned them into the position I wanted them to go into, and then I filled and topped it off with the rest of the resin material. You're going to want to let this dry overnight for about 24 hours or so, and once they are fully hardened and cured, you can just pop them right out of the mold, and you have these really, really cute coasters. However, I wanted to elevate mine and take them just one step further, so I'm using some of this brass gilding paint. Just go and carefully paint around the edge of these coasters to give them kind of like a metallic finish on the edge. I just think it kind of locks in the design, and that finishes them off. This is probably one of my favorite dollar store projects I've ever created, and I ended up finding a ton of these little canvases in different sizes and also some assorted faux florals at the dollar store, and I pulled them off of the stem. We're going to be doing a very similar method to that gold brass mirror that we created earlier, but we're going to turn this one into a really cute wall hanging. So the first thing I did was I grabbed all my florals from the Dollar Tree, brought them outside, and just gave them a coat of brass spray paint just to kind of get the actual coating process going. We're going to be able to go back in later and really finish it off, but for now we're going to be using the brass spray paint. The next thing that I did was I went in and I added gold paint to the back side of all of my canvases, and I love how it goes over the top of the staple. It really makes it look welded. Next, moving on, we're going to be applying the first set of florals to our wooden dowel. Now from this wooden dowel, our little canvases are going to hang, so this is going to be kind of like the most focal point of the piece. I brought it back outside once all of our florals were attached to it and just sprayed any of those excess areas. And last but not least, you're just going to go ahead and use some string and apply on your canvases. Inside of these little canvases, you're actually able to go ahead and just pop in a photo or however you want to style them. One of my most viewed videos on my channel is actually this IKEA hacks video where I turned this Trampa doormat from IKEA into a really cute, just customized doormat. So all you're going to actually need is some black paint and a paintbrush. And what I'm going to be doing is on the bottom left-hand corner, I'm going to be writing the word hello. So just kind of freehand writing this out. You can totally use block letters or a stencil to help you with this. Flipping it completely 180, I'm going to go ahead on the opposite side and put goodbye. This is just such a cute idea. You can actually place this right outside of your door, have the hello face the person as they enter, and the goodbye face them as they leave. Back into the wall decor and also back into the macrame, we are going to be starting off with a 12 and 14 inch ring for this project, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut out 2 yard pieces of string, which I'm going to then just slip knot onto the top of our 2 rings. You're going to want to have 2 of them to start. Simply cross them over as shown here and do a simple half hitch knot to secure it to the bottom left side and bottom right side of the original knot. So all you have to do for this is just wrap it around once as shown, wrap it around one more time, and then just pull your tail right through that loop that it creates, and that is your half hitch knot. And from here on out, it is pretty repetitive. You're just going to go ahead and apply another slip knot on top, wrap it underneath, and then go ahead to the opposite side and do a simple slip knot to attach it on there. This might be a particular project that you want to watch the full video on because it's a little bit challenging for me to cut all of this into a little 1-minute section for you guys. But once you have all of your knots attached, it kind of creates this really interesting woven pattern in the middle, and you have all of these little tails here, which I then went ahead and did a blunt chop on at the bottom just to finish it off. On the top back side, I added a little loop that I could hang this up on the wall with, and that finished off this wall decor project. I really like this one, and you guys also have recreated it so many times. I remember seeing these wreath forms at the Dollar Tree all the time, and I never knew what to do with them, but I always knew I wanted to create something with a wreath form. So I went ahead and I grabbed this really thin gauge artistic wire, and I started off by just wrapping it all the way around the entire exterior of this wreath form. So I just kind of cut off sections and wrapped it as I went, just kind of going around the front side and the back side pretty close together, and occasionally also wrapping it around our middle strand or the top strand to kind of just add a little bit more detail and make the wire not look super uniform. So every now and then I would kind of just wrap it around the middle, or I'd wrap it around the top, and it just added a little bit more interest to the piece. So I went ahead and finished the entire round of this piece, and then I went ahead and grabbed some masking tape, and I kind of just placed it randomly every couple of inches around the frame there, and I went in with my gold spray paint thinking that once I removed it, it would be such a cool mixed metal design, and I just honestly didn't like it that much. So I actually went back with white spray paint and spray painted the full piece white, and finished it off with some brass gilding paint around the entire outside edge and also the inner rim, and that finishes off your new picture frame. I actually used this tray earlier in a project, which was that mirror. It is the Stockholm 2017 tray, and I used some of these hairpin legs that I found on Amazon. So all you're going to need in addition to this is some strong bond adhesive. So I actually flipped this tray over, and I'm going to use it as the tabletop for our little table that we're creating. This is going to be kind of like a little side table, and I suggest using E6000 to adhere this leg to the bottom, and also go back in and add E6000 into all of those holes at a generous amount. That way, once it's dry, it almost acts as a nail, and that really finishes off this project. Super simple and easy side table recreation. For our next project, I wanted to share with you guys how to create your very own knobs using clay and also these really cute photo holders. So the first thing I did was I kind of created a chunky ball, and I just honestly inserted a screw on the inside, and this is going to be a knob for a dresser. I'm going to create a triangle shaped one as well. And then right here, I'm kind of just creating a disc and using a popsicle stick to create a slice down the center. This is going to be our little photo holder or memento holder. So you're gonna wanna go ahead and bake these, and once they come out of the oven, you could just simply paint them as you'd like. I use my brass gilding paint on the round knob to kind of give it a hammered look, and then on the smaller one I painted it pink, added some white details to give it that ceramic vibe, and last but not least I just left the actual picture holder completely raw. This candlestick DIY is actually one of my most recreated projects on my YouTube channel, and all you have to do for this is actually fill up a pitcher or something pretty tall that you could submerge your full candlestick in with some lukewarm water, and you're going to let your candles sit for about 15 minutes or so. Once they come out of that water, they're actually extremely malleable. They almost are like a wet noodle in a sense that you have a little bit of time to shape them however you would like to. So it's really fun to be able to create these very organic and abstract shapes with your taper candles, and it just makes them a little bit more interesting. You can even go in with a rolling pin like I did with this one, flatten down the wax a little bit, it's not sticky at all, and then go in and twist it to create a funky twisted candle. So there are a ton of different alterations that you could do for this particular project. I also went ahead and kind of created this looped candle, and lastly I used 2 purple candles to kind of create this standing, it's called a duo candle, where basically the bottom base is kind of twisted and then it has this really cool kind of double-sided candle, I guess you could say. So I went ahead and I tried to melt them together, but it honestly didn't work. I ended up just kind of gluing them together with some hot glue and finishing it off with a little bit of wax, and that is how I finished off all of these really cute abstract taper candles. This next project was one that I kind of just did for fun with materials that I already owned. I used one of the little woven macrame baskets from IKEA along with the round circle object, which is this one right here. I've used this in a previous DIY as well. And I went ahead and I constructed it. And what I kind of realized I could do with these 2 IKEA items was actually create a basketball hoop, which sounds strange, but I thought it was really cute for like a little boy's room or something like that. So I went ahead and I cut away the mesh from the bag. So we just had this nice little like layer of mesh that I could then use to create my very own net. So what I basically did to create this net was I went ahead and I added a little dab of hot glue every now and then, and I just adhered it around the actual ring of the little Lindrande piece from IKEA. And once it was fully secured around on the back side, I did adhere it all the way on the back, and I glued together the net kind of on the back side because it was going to be open on the back side. So I glued that together as well. I then went ahead and cut away any excess material that I didn't need to use anymore, and I grabbed that little rimming that was actually the original handle of the bag, and I just glued it onto the bottom there just to make it seem a little bit more secure and overall a bit more finished. So once I had that glued on, I was able to attach my very own hook on the back side, and this is how I created a little basketball hoop for a little boy's room or anywhere you want to add this. This next project blew up on TikTok, and I knew I wanted to recreate it here on my channel, so I actually grabbed 2 different gallons of soda. This was actually just ginger ale gallons, and I went ahead and I cut the tops off with an X-Acto knife, and I grabbed this fairy light pack. Now, this fairy light pack was from Amazon, and if you plan on running this all the time, I do suggest getting one that plugs directly into the wall as opposed to a battery-operated one, which you're going to kind of have to hide the cord down the wall if necessary. So what I ended up doing was just using the battery-powered one. I'm just going to use this on more special occasions. So I went ahead and I glued the battery pack on the inside and glued the 2 pieces together, and then I added a string which is going to be used for hanging it up. I suggest gluing down the string first rather than adding the polyfill because the string honestly is kind of hard to find once you add all of that polyfill, so make sure to add your string first and then go ahead and just apply clumps of this polyfill material, which is essentially what you use to like stuff a doll or stuff a stuffed animal with or a pillow. I just glued this on around the outside, and a little tip for you guys that I learned from somebody who actually creates these is to use hairspray to make sure that your polyfill stays together. So you can spray hairspray on it as if it's actual hair, and it will kind of make it stay together a bit more. This is a really cute way how to make your very own Polaroid magnets for your fridge or any surface that you can add magnets to. So the first thing that I did was I actually went into my Photoshop application and I found a Polaroid image on Google, and I just duplicated it 8 times, and then I went to Pinterest and found a couple of images and just screenshot them into square shapes, just images that I personally liked. And I also did one of myself just to show you guys the different variations you can go for. I popped the images on the inside of each of the Polaroids there, and I printed it out as shown. And next what you're going to want to do is just cut them out using an an X-Acto knife, so I just cut around all of the edges, making sure that each of my little Polaroids was its own image, and just kind of making sure to cleanly cut each of the Polaroid pieces because we are going to be adding these onto a foam sheet next, which is kind of going to elevate them and just make them a bit more substantial. So I went ahead and I cut down different foam squares for each of our little magnets, and I glued on top of it our printed out piece of paper, and that really finishes off the base of our magnet. Super simple and very, very easy. The last step in creating these magnets is just to apply a little magnet on the back side. I just use these little circle ones from the craft store, and you can hang these up on your fridge or wherever you'd like. This is a super easy hack to make your very own sea glass vessels. So I got a couple of glass vases from the dollar store, and I'm going to be mixing some Elmer's glue with just some basic food coloring to create basically a colored Elmer's glue. And all you have to do from here on out is actually just paint this on the exterior of your glass vessel. And once it dries down, it's going to end up being such a pretty matte color. So I ended up applying just a decent amount of glue and then adding in a couple drops of food coloring. Do keep in mind that it's going to be pretty translucent, but once it dries, you're really going to be able to see that color. For this first one here, I just did a nice minty green shade, and for our second one, I added some more Elmer's glue into a Dixie cup, and I just went ahead and I did a blue sea glass, which I love the way that this one turned out. I went ahead and I applied a nice coat on the outside of our vessel, and then you're just gonna let them dry, and once they are dry, they look super cute like this. When the moon mirror became popular on TikTok, one of the most requested projects I created was this moon mirror. So I figured I'd go out and grab a circular shaped mirror, some joint compound, and get to work. So basically for this project, what you're going to want to do is kind of map out where you want your moon shape to be on the right side of your mirror there, and spread a decently thick amount of joint compound on that section. I probably did a 1/4 inch, but you can vary it and make it thicker in some sections. I believe that also gives it a little bit more texture. And next, what you could see me doing is actually going in with a sea sponge, and I'm going to go ahead and just create some nice texture throughout the area. And lastly, you're going to want to go in with a squirt bottle and just spray vigorously in spots to create craters in your moon. I used some paper towels to just absorb any excess water and went back in with my spatula just to smooth out some sections and add some more joint compound to other sections to kind of create an elevated look. You're going to want to let this dry overnight, and as the joint compound dries, it actually cracks a little bit, which I think gives even more texture and dimension to the moon shape. So what I'm going to be doing next is mixing up a little bit of brown acrylic paint with some white to create kind of an off-whitish color, which I'm going to go ahead and paint my entire moon shape with just to give it a full coat of one solid color. And then I'm also going back in with a little bit of diluted brown and just some other whites and spray paints, whatever I want to add in here just to kind of add texture, and that finishes off your moon mirror. Now this project was a really fun texture that I kind of recreated using some of this lightweight spackle from the dollar store. I also used this glass vessel as well, also from the dollar store. But basically I scooped out this spackling material, and it almost has this like moon sand kind of a feeling to it. It feels almost like clay, but it's not too wet, but it's also dry. It just has a very odd texture. So I figured, why don't I try going ahead and applying this to the entire exterior of one of these glass vases and creating almost like a stone finish vase. And this piece only cost me around $3 to create. I used 2 full canisters of that spackling mixture. I also went ahead and applied it on the inside top rim. Once it dries down, it looks like this. Here we have another fun Lolhals IKEA rug hack. This is using the same exact masking tape we used prior. This one is actually a little bit wider than that one, but I started off by taking a 12-inch strip and finding the exact center of the rug and placing down my 12-inch strip in a horizontal fashion. Once you have your 12-inch strip placed down, everything else just kind of comes from there. You're going to want to go ahead and place down your tape as shown here. Now, I just went ahead and made sure that every section that did not have tape was exactly 2 knots wide. That way, when we sprayed our black on there, there was more of the actual natural part of the rug as opposed to the black there. I wanted the black to be a little bit more just like not as present as the natural jute itself. So I went outside, sprayed it with some black spray paint so that way all those sections were covered, brought it back inside once it was dried, and pulled off all that tape to reveal your brand new rug pattern. This one ended up being a really cool kind of abstract geometric rug, and I love the way that it turned out. For our next project, I wanted to share with you guys how to make some really cute cement or concrete planters. So I started off with some of this cement mix. Now this is not the cement mix I currently use. This one has so many large rocks in it. I actually suggest getting the pre-sifted cement mix that comes in the tub from Lowe's or Home Depot. And what I ended up doing was just mixing this with water and turning it into the consistency that I want it to be, and then pouring it into a foam cup, which is going to be the mold for our planter. Now pressing inside of that foam cup, I am applying a little kind of solo shot glass, which you're going to want to weigh down with a couple of rocks or heavy stones. That way it sits in the middle of your cup and allows it to dry, and this is going to be the mold base for your piece. So once it has fully dried, you could remove that inner solo cup. You have your little place that you're now going to put your plant inside of, and you can also cut away the foam cup from the exterior. I can definitely say that foam cups really create a beautiful mold for any project. It's very, very smooth in the end, and I like the finish that it gives. So sanding that top rim just to kind of give it a finished off look. You could then go in with a little bit of paint to add a detail, or just leave it as is. So on the side here, I used my silver gilding paint, and I just painted the side of this silver, making sure I had a nice straight line with my tape. You can also do it horizontally or vertically, but once you have them all taped off, these are your finished concrete planters. If you're in need of a boho pendant light, I have you covered with this IKEA hack. I basically ended up using 2 of these wooden bowls that you could find in the kitchen section with a large hole drill bit, because we are going to be drilling through the exact center of both of these bowls, both the large one and the small bowl. And next what you're going to want to do is go ahead and start stringing some wooden beads onto a jute cord or whatever cord that you have that kind of matches the color tone of your bowls there. So to get our pendant shape, I'm actually going to be gluing the bowls on the outsides together. So as you can see, it's kind of creating this almost very, I guess, light shape. I feel like this is a very kind of mod light shape. And around the center section where we added the glue, I'm going to be tying on our wooden beads. That's kind of going to add our boho element to this piece. Now for our light cord, I picked up a basic light cord from IKEA, and I ended up wrapping the entire cord with our jute rope. That way it just matched the aesthetic of our pendant light to start. You're going to go ahead and glue this directly down in the center, applying a generous amount of Gorilla Hot glue. You're just going to want something very industrial strength. That way you can press this down in the center. Now on the underside, you're going to want to also apply on this piece, which kind of just finishes it off and makes it look a little bit more finished. And then pop your bulb in and you are good to go. In here and transfer them into soil. So I ripped them all apart, and I'm going to be boiling them down in some water. This literally looks like beef. If you guys watch the full tutorial of this project, I talk about how it looks identical to roast beef, and that is basically what it is. But we are going to be using a mixer here to mix it up in a bowl and break down all of our paper fibers, because what we're going to be doing is creating a paper mache bowl using some joint compound and some Elmer's glue. So mixing that into our material to start, which is basically our broken down paper fibers that is all heated up. We're going to want a nice mushy material. Next, you're going to want to go ahead and find some form of mold. So I found this large IKEA bowl. I used some oil on the exterior of it and also added some cling wrap on the outside as well. That way our piece would not stick in the end and it would just nicely come off. So scooping a large dollop of our roast beef material on top, but it's really paper mache. You're going to press this on the exterior, let it dry in a place for 4 to 5 days. Now, I suggest if you want to create this project, going back and watching the full tutorial, which I'll link it below for you guys. I just went ahead and I painted this with a little bit of cream paint, some black paint. I also added some wood stain to kind of give it a vintage look, and that finished off this bowl. And our last project is a very fun vase project using this pool noodle that I found at the dollar store along with some of the lightweight spackling from the dollar store as well. I just went ahead and I actually coated the outside of this pool noodle using our lightweight spackling to almost give it a ceramic finish. I really wanted this piece to kind of give off CB2 or Urban Outfitters vase vibes that you would buy for like $150. Now I went through so many processes of spray painting this piece. I started off with black to start and I was honestly not a fan. So then I went in with this stone finish spray paint. I sprayed this on there, gave it a generous coat of the stone finish, and once again, I was not the biggest fan. It kind of just had this odd colorway to it and the black wasn't fully coated. So then I brought it inside and I used some white acrylic paint mixed up with a little bit of tan acrylic paint, mixed that together, and then I fully coated my piece with this paint, and I love the way that it turned out. It totally finished it off and made it look like a really funky retro vase. You can pop some florals on the inside and that finishes off your vase project.
Thank you for watching the full video and stay tuned for more helpful videos. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment and share. Most importantly, stay safe.